Hi, I'm Charles Fisher with Fisher Real Estate. I'm here with Ben Shu today with First American Title. We're going to talk a little bit about the title process and how it relates to real estate.
Thanks,
Ben?
Charles.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Of course.
What is title?
So title is actually part of the closing process where you work in conjunction with escrow to make sure that when a seller sells a property and the buyer buys the property, that anything on the title on the property and against the seller doesn't transfer over to the buyer, in a nutshell.
Okay. I would say that title is one thing that buyers and sellers see on their escrow sheets and their escrow line item costs, and a lot of times they don't really know what they're getting and what they're paying for. So I know there's obviously protections between sellers and buyers. Can you explain the differences between the benefits from the buyer side and the benefits of the seller side?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you sell a piece of property, you're actually required by law to have title insurance. Okay, so what we do as a title company is once your property goes into escrow, we actually do research, all the background research on the property itself and also on the sellers to make sure that any liens, encumbrances, or potential interests are all addressed by the seller, and any liens or encumbrances are paid off prior to that property being transferred over to the buyer. So when the buyer actually pays the $2 million around here for a piece of property, that they are the sole and rightful owners of the property without any encumbrances or potential interest from anybody that had the property previously attaching to them or to the property.
Makes sense.
Same thing goes with the bank. If you have a loan on the property, the bank wants to make sure that they are in first position and there is nobody else that might have a potential interest or any sort of encumbrance on that property.
That's why on the seller's, basically the seller's net sheet from escrow, you're going to say, or their settlement statement, it shows a seller's paid, which is most common, where you're going to see the seller paid the buyer's title insurance because they're more or less insuring the buyer from their ownership. And then but buyers, oftentimes, when you write the contract, you see that, seller's paying title. But buyers, if they're getting a loan, forget when the lender's sheet comes through, it says there's also a lender's title insurance. So they're still technically paying it. And that's why often the seller would pay for the buyers, because they're going to have to basically pay their own.
So that's actually the most confusing part of title, because the seller's title insurance is not really for the seller, it's actually for the buyer. The seller's paying it to ensure that they're transferring a free and clear title to the buyer. So that policy is actually protecting the buyer, but the seller is paying for it.
And then the buyer's paying for basically a lender title policy so that the lender's protected from that as well. So there's really two policies going on, even though the purchase contract makes people think there might only be one. If
100%.
they have a loan.
The buyer, so the buyer pays for a title policy only if they have a loan.
I'm sure in your experience you have some great examples of issues that arise. What would you say one of the most common ones that might be that you see on title reports?
So title, there's so many issues that we see all the time.
Which I feel like is also never really discussed or explained to buyers and sellers. It's always handled with us, with escrow and us behind the scenes. So that's why it's one of those things that people don't understand what they're paying for, but there's so much that goes through the review of a title policy. It's exactly why explaining it will actually help.
So basically what title primarily protects against, like we were talking about, are any liens or encumbrances against this seller. And that would include any loans that they might have, judgments, support liens, and the most important one actually is fraud. What we're protecting to make sure is that when a seller sells a property, that they are the actual seller and the person that has the ability to make that decision and to rightfully convey title to the buyer.
Have you actually had a scene where someone's actually trying to commit fraud? And
we do see it, not often, but we have seen it before, yes. Where you do see some identity theft cases, where you do see someone trying to sell the property that doesn't belong to them.
So they're trying to impersonate somebody's name on title, and you have to verify that?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
I mean, have you seen any recourse for that? Has anything ever gone through? Or I know that's probably the least usual case, but I mean, obviously other than maybe encroachments or easements or things that aren't caught or liens that are caught after the close.
That does happen, unfortunately. There are times when things do slip through. A deal transaction does ends up closing, and then the title company would be on the hook to protect either the lender or the buyer. So it's actually a great thing that you brought up, because you see a lot of these title lock or home title protection commercials out there nowadays. Pretty much that's what a title company does. When there is a fraudulent transaction on the property, or fraudulent transaction that's being done, the title company actually protects either the buyer, the seller, or the lender in that. And it's the title company's job to make sure that that type of fraud doesn't occur during the transaction.
Yeah, I mean, do you have an example of maybe one after the close, something's happened? Does it go to court, litigation? How's the title company get involved, and they're protecting the buyer?
Yes.
Post-close. So if something were to say, hey, didn't know this easement existed, this paperwork wasn't included, wasn't attached, and now it comes up, or this lien, what happens? I mean, is it a general insurance process?
It is, yep, it's exactly what it is. General insurance process, depending on the situation. If you have a fraudulent, if you have title that's being conveyed by somebody that didn't have the authority to convey it, it becomes all of the above situation where you potentially may have to go to court. There are going to be settlements that's going to happen, and the title company does have an obligation to defend the buyer. If it's a lien that's missed, that was on the property that just didn't get paid from the seller, the title company then steps in to rectify that lien and make sure that lien holder is paid off.
Okay, right. I mean, I have to say, when you look through title reports, this is why we defer to you guys. Because they are not the most simple forms to look through and reports. So on those reports, given someone buys a house or sells a house and they've only maybe sold one or two places, they don't have the in-depth knowledge that you do. Definitely not what we do. And what exactly, if you were looking one at the first time or the second time, what are things that you would try to say, hey, look, that stand out or they should look for that are on a title report? It seems to be usually the first couple pages are the only ones I look at, because it has all of them itemized.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. The most important section of the title report is what we call the subject B. And that's really where anything that's recorded on the property is listed. So from a seller's perspective, when you're looking at the title report, you're kind of just fact-checking in a way. You're just kind of going down the line to make sure that what the title report is stating is true. So it's showing you as the rightful owner, and any potential liens or judgments or loans that are on the property, you want to make sure that you know about those, and that they were indeed yours, whether it was a mortgage or a judgment. You want to make sure that any liens that you are paying off does belong to you. Okay. If you do, and sometimes you might see a judgment that's posted that may not be yours. That's pretty common, especially if you have a common name. You do see that because the title report will show any potential liens that are against the person's name. Now that's very easily cross-referenced and rectified. During the escrow process, as a seller, you're always asked for a statement of information, where you fill out your name, birthday, social, and other personal identifying markers. And that's what the title company uses to cross-reference any potential liens or judgments to make sure that what we are paying off for, number one, is yours. And number two, if there are any judgments that we didn't see that are posted against you as an individual, are taken care of during the escrow process.
Nice.
All right. So on a seller perspective, you want to just make sure that what's on the title report is yours. Definitely, if your property is in a trust, or if it happens to be a parental property with a trust, it's really just about making sure you have all your documents in line. So the number one advice I would give to any potential sellers, especially if they have family property, is if they have aging parents, or if there are any health concerns, to make sure you start gathering all the documents and make sure you have copies of trusts, things like that, any amendments and documentation, because you are going to need them in order to sell. And if it becomes an issue if any documents are lost that you can't find. From a buyer's perspective, what we always advise is to really just kind of look with your eyes on the property.
Right.
Okay. Most buyers spend a lot of time being overly concerned with any liens or judgments or loans that are on the property.
Right.
Those you don't necessarily have to be concerned with as much because they are going to be paid off at close.
Right.
What a buyer really needs to be concerned with are any potential easements or CC&Rs on the property.
Yep.
Okay. Especially if you're planning on doing any renovations, you want to make sure you know where the easements are. Yep. Easements are very common with any utilities, sewer, gas, water. The utility company typically will have an easement on your property so that they can gain access to maintain, repair the lines.
Yep.
If you have, if you're, one of the big ones is, if you're purchasing a property that happens to have a shared driveway.
Right.
Yeah, okay. You want to make sure that there is a driveway easement on the property and that you have the right to use that driveway.
Right.
Okay. Because once when you're in escrow, before you actually close, you still have the power to leave the property. Right. You have the power to decline the transaction. But once you close, if there's no easement on the property for the driveway, then that kind of becomes your problem. Yeah.
Right. That's one of the things with the buyers that we'll often look through, and you and Grant both started to make me have this a standard of practice where I get the title report. The first things I basically respond with first break it down so you can help understand it so I can tell the client. And secondly, to plot any easements that are on there because oftentimes the title report doesn't come with any of that.
Yes.
So you specifically have to request that.
Yes.
Other than just clicking a link and saying, oh, there's an easement somewhere. Until you get the actual map of where it is, it doesn't really have any effect. I mean, you know there's one there.
Yes.
But you won't know where it is until you actually request that.
Correct.
And it doesn't cost anything, so you just have it.
Yep.
It's funny that it doesn't come with it. I don't
No,
know why they don't just send it.
it's usually one of those by request title companies. Typically, we make it a standard practice to plot all our easements, but most title companies is by request only.
It's such a crucial piece.
Yeah.
If you're going to build something and realize there's an easement, you can't go 10 feet. Your setback's 5, and you can only go 10. I mean, it inhibits the property significantly.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so that's obviously a good thing everyone needs to look through.
Yes, and especially with the CC&Rs too. CC&Rs aren't just on condos, but a lot of communities for single-family homes will have them as well.
Yeah.
And so, you definitely, if you are planning on doing any renovation or using the property for any other purpose, you definitely want to review the CC&Rs to make sure that what you want to do is allowed and you have any setback requirements, so that if you are looking to extend, you know about those requirements.
Right. And it comes down to condos and townhomes, which you will always have the CC&Rs and other things attached to it.
Yeah.
Anything specific that you'd say you want buyers and sellers to look out for on those specific types of properties, since it's common interest?
I mean, your big ones are just to familiarize yourself with them.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the HOA regulations and rules will be disclosed to you, but they'll be in the CC&Rs also. So once again, if you're trying to do anything outside of the norm, definitely review the CC&Rs so you're familiar with them, so that you know if you want to convert your garage to a bonus room or whatever, to see if there's any prohibitions against that.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess with that, would there be any other things you'd say for a buyer and seller or anyone that's looking to? One other question actually is if, obviously it's the insurance that's taking place during transactions. As a seller or an owner, they're not going to sell, but you mentioned those LifeLock places and things like that. Is there anything you would recommend people to do to secure their title other than using I don't know if it's LifeLock or what it is, using one of those things to monitor? Would you need to run anything? Would you want to pull a report every 5 years, or have you seen any issues where it's?
No, I mean, because everyone's most institutions are pretty well aware of the title fraud. Right. I would recommend for sellers to kind of just be aware of it, be cognizant of it, and look out for their mail. If there's anything that's recorded on your property, the county recorder will send you a notice letting you know that something was recorded against the property. And just be cognizant and keep your paperwork. Make sure you're caught up on all your documentation and paperwork.
Perfect. Well, I love it. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Thank
you. Appreciate you coming in.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you.